The system didn't give us a tutorial. It just opened the floorboards. On day 1, the Abyssal Flood swallowed the earth. The ground turned into a sea of highly corrosive black mud, breeding millions of shadow monsters. If you stayed on the ground, you died. The only safe zones were the high peaks, massive mountains floating above the clouds. But access was strictly monopolized by the elite guilds who bought up all the teleportation crystals. They abandoned the lower classes to the mud. I worked as a porter for the Aegis Guild for 3 years. I carried their gear, mapped their dungeons, and bled for them. But when the crystal reached maximum capacity, Guildmaster Kong didn't hesitate. He kicked me right off the platform. Dead weight, he called me. I didn't scream as I fell. I just looked at Kang's smug face as he warped away to paradise. I wasn't scared of dying. I was furious that I spent my whole life at the bottom, just to be thrown away like trash. I was inches from the jaws of the swarm when the world froze. The system recognized my absolute refusal to die on the ground. A prompt I had never seen before shattered into my vision. I didn't awaken as a warrior or a mage. I awakened as an architect. The architect class didn't give me a sword. It gave me the deconstruct and build skills. With gravity resuming and the monsters lunging, I didn't try to attack. I reached out and used my skill directly on the apocalypse itself. Deconstruct. Build. The lethal, corrosive mud instantly pixelated, reformatting under my system authority into a perfectly solid floating cubic block of dark obsidian stone. I crashed onto it, the jaws of the swarm snapping on empty air inches from my boots. The block wasn't just solid, it belonged to my territory now. I commanded it to rise. The single 1x1 floating obsidian block defied gravity, floating 10 feet into the air. I sat on my tiny, 1x1 sky island, listening to the monsters screeching below me. I had survived. Survival wasn't enough. An elite crawler mutated and leapt 10 feet into the air, aiming for my throat. I didn't flinch. I just placed my hand on its head and activated deconstruct. The monster didn't bleed, it instantly shattered into raw building materials. 10 units of iron. 5 units of dark wood. The world was an apocalypse to everyone else. To me, it was just an infinite sandbox of raw materials. I spent the iron and what I harvested from the monster. With a swipe of my hand, 10 more floating obsidian blocks clicked into place. My 1x1 raft was now a 3x3 floating obsidian platform. I looked down at the millions of crawlers swarming the flooded city. Where the elite guild saw a nightmare, I saw a limitless supply of free real estate. The grind had officially begun. I spent the next 6 hours farming the apocalypse. Every monster that jumped at me became stone. Every ruined skyscraper poking out of the mud became steel. By midnight, my tiny dirt block had expanded into a massive, 20x20 floating obsidian base. I commanded my new territory to rise above the toxic fog. Safe in the clear night air, I built myself a highly detailed, Gothic-style obsidian throne and opened the architect's tech tree. Automated mana turrets. Gravity shields. Golem factories. The possibilities were endless, and I had the entire destroyed world to harvest. Far in the distance, breaking through the cloud line, I could see the glowing lights of the high peaks. The exclusive VIP sanctuary where Guildmaster Kong and the rest of the elites were throwing a party for surviving. They thought they could leave me to die in the mud while they ruled the sky. But they didn't know I just unlocked the keys to the world's code. I'm going to build an empire up here. And when my island is big enough to block out their sun, I'm going to deconstruct their mountain right out from under them. Day 2. The sun still rose, even though the world had ended. The sky was bleeding red, reflecting off the infinite sea of black mud below. Sitting on my obsidian throne, the apocalypse honestly looked quite peaceful. But peace doesn't grant EXP, and it certainly doesn't build empires. The Abyssal Flood wasn't just ground-based. I checked the architect crafting menu. With the iron I sucked out of the ruined skyscrapers and the stone from the crawlers, I had enough materials for active defenses. I walked to the perimeter of my base and selected the turret blueprint. I didn't need hammers or a forge. The architect class bypasses the labor entirely. I spent the resources, and the system took over. Within 3 seconds, a fully operational automated obsidian turret materialized from the green light. It was heavy, brutal, and lined with system runes. It didn't need ammunition, it drew ambient mana directly from my territory's core. And I had enough materials to build 20 of them. I lined the absolute perimeter of my 20 by 20 base with 20 turrets, creating a perfect 360-degree kill zone. Anyone or anything that approached my airspace was going to get a very loud, very lethal eviction notice. I didn't have to wait long to test them. As the sun fully crested, a massive shadow fell over my island. A flock of abyssal gargoyles, the aerial variants of the mud swarm, spotted a juicy piece of fresh meat floating in their sky. In a normal survival scenario, flying monsters are a death sentence. You can't outrun them, and you can't hide from them on a flat platform. Hundreds of them folded their wings and dive-bombed straight toward my throne. But I wasn't playing a survival game. I was playing a tower defense game. As soon as they crossed the 50-meter threshold, the system registered hostile entities. All 20 obsidian turrets tilted their barrels upward in perfect mechanical unison. Target lock acquired. The turrets opened fire. It wasn't a battle, it was a meat grinder. A blinding storm of concentrated neon green mana beams tore through the sky, instantly shredding the gargoyles before they even got within 20 feet of the floor. They were literally vaporized mid-dive. I didn't even stand up. I spent 5 system coins to synthesize a glass of clean drinking water, sat back on my throne, and enjoyed the fireworks. It is incredibly relaxing to watch your automated systems farm EXP and loot for you while you stay perfectly hydrated. 10 seconds later, the sky was clear. The firing stopped, and the dead gargoyles rained down onto the obsidian floor, piling up in a massive heap of grotesque, bat-winged corpses right at the foot of my throne. I stepped off the throne and waved my hand over the pile of corpses. Deconstruct. The entire heap of dead monsters instantly dissolved into green pixels. I didn't have to carve them for cores or skin them for leather. The system processed the raw materials instantly. The architect class categorized loot differently. Swords and armor were useless to me. But the system extracted the very organ that allowed the gargoyles to fly, 50 abyssal levitation cores. This was exactly what I needed to upgrade the island's altitude engine. I drove the levitation cores directly into the central foundation block of my base and dumped all the harvested stone into the expansion menu. The base groaned, vibrating with absolute power. A shockwave of green system light erupted outward, instantly materializing thousands of new blocks. My 20 by 20 platform expanded into a massive 50 by 50 fortress. With the upgraded levitation engine, the fortress began to ascend rapidly, breaking through the toxic cloud layer. It was massive now. Big enough to cast a shadow over the ruined world below. I looked toward the distant terrestrial peaks where the elites were hiding. They thought they were the apex of this new world. I was going to become their ceiling. A 50 by 50 grid of pure, polished obsidian. It was the size of a city block, floating flawlessly above the apocalypse. But staring at all that empty space, I realized a fundamental truth of base building: if you are doing the harvesting yourself, you aren't a king. You're just a glorified miner. I opened the Architects, Infrastructure, tab. I had thousands of units of stone and iron sitting in my inventory from the Abyssal Gargoyle massacre. I didn't need to dive into the toxic mud below to gather more. I just needed to build something that would do it for me. I confirmed the build. A massive pillar of neon green data erupted on the right wing of my platform. Within seconds, the system synthesized my raw materials into a towering, brutalist obsidian golem foundry. The heavy metallic thud of its completion vibrated through the floorboards. The foundry roared to life, feeding on the ambient mana of my territory. Heavy, mechanical footsteps echoed across the polished floor. The scavenger golems marched out of the glowing green exhaust bays. Unfeeling, tireless, and entirely loyal to the system authority. I gave them a single directive: harvest. The massive obsidian constructs marched to the very edge of the platform and threw themselves off into the abyss. Thick, neon green energy tethers unspooled from the factory, keeping them anchored as they plunged into the deadly black mud below. They were immune to the toxic corrosion and completely ignored the monster bites. They just walked along the flooded ocean floor, deconstructing everything they touched. I sat on my throne and watched my resource counter spin upward at a terrifying, blur-inducing speed. I had successfully automated the apocalypse. With an infinite stream of raw materials flowing into my inventory every second, surviving was no longer the goal. Luxury was. I dumped 100,000 units of stone into a single blueprint directly behind my throne. A sprawling, multi-story Gothic obsidian manor materialized, complete with glowing green stained glass windows and lavish balconies. While the rest of humanity was fighting for scraps of rat meat in the mud or begging the elite guilds for shelter, I spent 50 system coins to synthesize a perfectly aged bottle of red wine. I lounged in a plush velvet chair on my private balcony, watching the world burn from a very comfortable distance. My peaceful evening was interrupted by a sharp, melodic chime from my territory's localized radar system. I glanced down at the holographic projection on my armrest. 3 fast-moving, high-energy signatures were rapidly approaching my airspace from the direction of the high peaks. The Aegis Guild. Guildmaster Kang's personal lapdogs. They had sent out a scouting party on their prized, tamed griffins to search for resources floating in the sky. Clad in shining silver armor and flowing blue capes, they thought they were the undisputed masters of the new world. They expected to find a floating chunk of dirt or a ruined, pre-apocalypse skyscraper they could pillage. Instead, they broke through the cloud line and slammed into the airspace of a colossal, perfectly geometric obsidian fortress. 20 automated turrets instantly painted their silver armor with glowing green targeting lasers. Their arrogance overrode their survival instincts. Assuming this was some ancient, unknown system ruin, the lead knight hovered his griffin just outside the turret perimeter. He pointed his lance at my balcony and demanded I hand over the control core of the artifact to the Aegis Guild immediately. I didn't dignify the demand with a response. I didn't even use the turrets. I just tapped the territory gravity control module on my armrest, cranking the localized gravity outside the perimeter to 50x. The majestic flying beasts were swatted out of the sky like flies, crashing brutally onto my polished obsidian floor in a tangle of broken feathers and dented silver armor. I walked down to the deck. The lead knight was groaning, trying to lift his heavy lance. I ignored him, walked up to his prized, S-rank tamed griffin, and placed my hand on its wing. Deconstruct. The knight screamed in absolute, mind-breaking horror as his majestic mount instantly dissolved into 100 units of raw meat and 50 magic feathers. I deconstructed the other 2 mounts just to make a point, leaving the 3 knights stranded on their knees on my floor. I tossed one of the magic feathers onto the lead knight's dented silver chest plate. "Walk to the edge and jump if you want to leave," I told him. "And if you survive the fall, tell Guildmaster Kong that his airspace belongs to me now. And his rent is due." Word travels fast when you drop 3 S-rank knights on their heads. On the highest terrestrial peak, Guildmaster Kong looked up from his stolen, natural mountain sanctuary. He didn't see an architect. He just saw a flying rock that had the audacity to approach his airspace. Kong didn't try to negotiate. He mobilized his entire mage division and powered up a guild-tier magical artillery cannon. It was an attack designed to obliterate A-rank dungeon bosses in a single shot. He gave the order to blow my island out of the sky. The golden beam crossed the distance in a second, packing enough heat to vaporize a mountain. But it didn't hit a mountain. It hit the automated, hex-grid gravity shield I installed under my floorboards. The shield didn't just block the attack, it absorbed the kinetic data and converted it into free mana for my turrets. The floorboards vibrated slightly, like driving over a pothole. I didn't even look up from my blueprint menu. A single artillery strike wasn't going to scratch obsidian reinforced by system-level architectural code. I engaged the levitation engines to maximum overdrive. The 50 by 50 obsidian fortress smoothly accelerated across the crimson sky. I wasn't just moving to attack them. I was moving to block their view of the sun. Down on the high peak, Guildmaster Kang's arrogant sneer vanished. The crimson daylight was instantly snuffed out. He looked up to see a perfectly flat, geometric ceiling of pitch-black obsidian blotting out the entire sky. He finally realized this wasn't a monster. It was a monument. Panic set in. Kang screamed for a full aerial assault. He and his elite vanguard cast mass levitation magic, flying straight up into the darkness with their swords drawn, determined to board my island and kill the pilot. My perimeter turrets acquired target locks immediately. I could have vaporized Kang and his elites in 3 seconds. But I walked to the edge of the polished floor and raised my hand, putting the defenses on standby. Turrets are for monsters. This was personal. Kang was flying right at me, his sword glowing. I didn't even look at him. I aimed my hand past his head, pointing directly down at the massive, natural mountain peak his guild was standing on. My system registered the terrestrial landmass not as a sanctuary, but as 5 million units of raw stone and dirt. I didn't need to fight his army. I just needed their raw materials. Deconstruct, terrestrial foundation, dot. The entire top half of the high peak, millions of tons of natural rock, dirt, and their precious white stone castle, instantly pixelated into a blinding storm of green code. Their levitation magic was anchored to the mana ley lines of the mountain. With the mountain deleted from reality, their tethers snapped. Kang's upward charge halted instantly. He looked up at me from 50 feet below, his arrogant sneer replaced by the exact same terror I felt yesterday, right before gravity dragged him back down to the mud. While Kang and his elites plummeted to their deaths in the swarm below, I collected my rent. Millions of units of stone, iron, and crystal flowed upward in a massive, pixelated reverse waterfall, funneling directly into my system inventory. I maxed out my inventory instantly. The 50 by 50 platform was barely a foundation anymore. I opened the architect menu, selected the entire accumulated mass of the high peak, and slapped the City Tier expansion button. The shockwave pushed the clouds away for miles. My platform didn't just grow, it evolved. 500 by 500 grid units. Massive obsidian perimeter walls slammed into place, lined with hundreds of automated defense arrays. In 10 seconds, I turned their natural mountain into a flawless, hovering geometric empire. I stood on the towering perimeter wall of my new city and watched the tiny splashes in the abyssal mud far below. Guildmaster Kang was right about one thing on day one. The weak belong on the ground. But the sky? The sky belongs to the architect. My territory had reached City Tier. It wasn't just a platform anymore, it was an ecosystem. The sprawling Gothic manor served as my sanctum, the foundry churned out workers on the right wing, and hundreds of turrets guarded the massive outer walls. It was perfect. Sitting on the balcony of my manor, I encountered my first real problem of the day. The resources from deleting the Aegis Guild's mountain had instantly maxed out my city's storage capacity. I had literally too much mass. I needed an excuse to spend it. The apocalypse was happy to oblige. It turns out, that massive terrestrial mountain wasn't just a geographical feature. Its mana ley lines were acting as a physical seal, corking a deep abyss trench. When I deleted the mountain, I deleted the lock. A world boss. The Abyssal Leviathan. It was so incomprehensibly massive that when it reared its serpentine head out of the mud, it was staring directly over the outer walls of my floating city. Its scales looked like jagged black mountains. The perimeter defense grid engaged automatically. Hundreds of obsidian turrets along the outer walls swiveled outward, unleashing a blinding, unified barrage of concentrated green mana directly into the beast's face. It was enough firepower to level a continent. The beams scattered harmlessly into the sky. The Leviathan's scales were perfectly insulated against standard mana attacks. Perimeter turrets are designed for swarms, not world bosses. The colossal dragon roared, pulling its head back to ram my city. The Leviathan rammed the city's underbelly. The hex grid shield absorbed the impact, but the sheer kinetic force made my wine glass rattle. I needed a bigger gun. I bypassed the standard defense tab and opened the restricted city tier superweapons menu. I had millions of units of stone and iron burning a hole in my inventory. I dumped 80% of my total reserves into a single blueprint, targeting the highest architectural point in my city, the central spire of my own manor. The Gothic spire split open, reformatting into a colossal, multi-barreled artillery cannon built directly into the roof of my house. The Obsidian Annihilator. It didn't just use ambient mana, it was hardwired into the central core of the entire 500 by 500 city grid. I authorized the firing sequence. The entire city dimmed for a microsecond. Then, every geometric grid line, every stained glass window, and every factory vent flared with radioactive green light. The Annihilator siphoned the stored kinetic energy of the entire territory into a single point. The Leviathan opened its jaws, preparing to unleash a breath attack that would melt my outer walls. I stood on my balcony, directly beneath the humming superweapon, and snapped my fingers. Eviction approved. The Obsidian Annihilator fired. It wasn't a laser, it was a physical pillar of compressed destruction. It engulfed the Leviathan's head, instantly vaporizing its impenetrable scales. The beam punched straight through the boss and hit the ground, physically parting the abyssal sea of mud for miles in every direction. The Leviathan's headless corpse collapsed back into the abyss. Drifting up from the vaporized remains was a mythic tier boss core, pulsing with heavy, blood-red energy. I cast a gravity tether from my balcony and dragged the massive crystal up to my territory. I suspended the mythic core in front of me on the balcony. The heat radiating off it was incredible. This wasn't just a trophy. A core this dense could power a localized atmosphere, or an interdimensional warp drive. The architectural possibilities were terrifying. I had conquered the mud. I had deleted the terrestrial elites. I had killed the world boss. But as I looked past my Gothic spires, straight up into the starry night sky, I saw the golden constellations of the system's true masters twinkling arrogantly. My city was still just a foundation. It was time to build higher. A mythic tier boss core wasn't meant to sit on a shelf. It was a terrestrial battery. I walked down from my manor balcony to the central courtyard and initiated the integration sequence, permanently fusing the Leviathan's heart into my city's central grid. The city drank the mythic mana instantly. The standard neon green system code mutated, blending with the heavy, violent crimson energy of the world boss. My defenses didn't just upgrade, they evolved into a hybrid mythic state. My airspace was now officially an impenetrable fortress. I leaned against my balcony railing, admiring the new crimson grid lines pulsing through my courtyard. But the energy spike was too massive to ignore. When you shine a flashlight that bright into the dark, something is bound to look back. And the gods were watching. The sky literally split open. No warning, no system prompt. A perfectly circular rift tore through the clouds directly above my manor, and a pillar of blinding, arrogant golden light slammed into the center of my courtyard like a physical weight. A constellation's avatar descended from the rift. Floating 30 feet above my polished floor, he radiated a sickeningly pure, divine aura. He didn't look at my sprawling city with awe, he looked at it like a child who had built a mud castle on his pristine carpet. He hovered over my courtyard, locked eyes with me on my balcony, and pointed a glowing finger. His voice bypassed my ears and echoed directly in my system interface. Mortal anomaly. Surrender the mythic core as tribute to the golden scales, and you shall be permitted to kneel in our grace. I leaned against the railing, took a sip of my wine, and stared at him. The sheer audacity. He broke into my airspace, hovered over my meticulously paved floor, and demanded my primary power source for the privilege of kneeling. My silence was all the answer he needed. His serene, divine mask slipped, instantly replaced by furious, ugly wrath. A mortal had refused an order. He raised his hands, gathering enough holy energy to vaporize my entire 500 by 500 grid in a single strike. I didn't let him finish the cast. I had just wired a mythic tier core directly into the island's gravity array. I slammed my hand onto the terminal on my balcony. Nobody hovers over my floor without permission. I triggered the mythic override. The entire city pulsed like a heartbeat. The Leviathan's core unleashed a localized gravity well so dense it distorted the light. The Avatar's holy spell shattered like cheap glass as the atmospheric pressure above the courtyard instantly multiplied by 10,000. The divine messenger didn't even have time to scream. He was swatted out of my sky like a mosquito. He slammed face first into the polished obsidian courtyard with enough force to crack his golden halo. The mythic gravity rings pinned him completely flat against the floor. He was grounded. I took my time walking down the grand staircase from the manor to the courtyard. The Avatar was gasping, trying to summon his divine strength to lift his head off my pavement, but the Leviathan's gravity was absolute. He was in my territory now. I stopped next to his head and crouched down. He threatened me with eternal damnation, struggling to speak. I just reached out and placed my hand on his cracked golden halo. Deconstruct. The divine artifact instantly dissolved into green system pixels. His eyes bulged in pure, existential terror. The system didn't care about his divinity. It processed the halo exactly the same way it processed a lump of iron. Divine Gold X50. I looked at the system notification, then looked down at the trembling, stripped avatar on my floor. Gods weren't untouchable. They were just premium building materials. I left him pinned to the floor as a warning, stood up, and pointed directly at the open golden rift in the sky. If the constellations wanted my core, they were going to have to come down here and take it. And when they did, I was going to deconstruct every single one of them and pave my streets with their gold. I reached the top of the golden staircase and stepped through the rift. I expected an army of angels or a boss room. Instead, I walked into a pristine, white marble plaza that stretched for miles. But the heavens weren't empty. They were just running a very different kind of farm. The plaza was packed with tens of thousands of towering crystal prisms. Inside every single one was a human survivor from the Abyssal Flood. The constellations weren't saving them. Golden cables siphoned their soul energy straight into the cosmic sky. The gods were using humanity as AA batteries. A massive, empty 500 by 500 city is a waste of good real estate. And I desperately needed a workforce that didn't require constant mana upkeep. I placed my hands on the marble floor and unleashed a maximum range, deconstruct. Thousands of divine prisms instantly shattered into green code. The golden cables snapped. Thousands of ragged, starving survivors collapsed onto the pristine marble floor of heaven. They woke up gasping for air, huddling together in terror, expecting the angels to return and punish them. One of them stepped out of the crowd to shield the others. The abyss had mutated her. Her forearms were twisted into jagged, feral shadow claws, and her eyes burned with the red, predatory glare of an aswang. She didn't know who I was, but she was ready to die fighting to protect her people. I didn't raise a weapon. I just pointed my thumb over my shoulder toward the massive golden staircase leading down to my territory. The gods think you're batteries, I told them. I think you're citizens. My city is empty. Walk down those stairs, swear loyalty to my grid, and you will never starve again. They didn't hesitate. Given the choice between golden cages and a black fortress, they chose the fortress. It was a surreal exodus. Thousands of ragged humans walking down a staircase made of pure divine gold, descending into the safety of my obsidian empire. When we hit the bottom of the stairs, the atmosphere of the 500 by 500 city shifted instantly. It wasn't just a cold, geometric superweapon anymore. With thousands of people lighting campfires and claiming space on the obsidian grid, the fortress suddenly had a heartbeat. A king doesn't let his people sleep on the floor. I opened the infrastructure tab, tapped into my millions of units of harvested stone, and authorized the residential blueprints. With rapid swipes of my hand, entire districts of solid obsidian houses materialized from the floorboards in seconds. I repurposed the golem foundry. Instead of mining the abyss, the scavenger golems became logistics workers. The massive, intimidating obsidian machines marched through the new streets, gently distributing synthesized rations and thermal blankets to the starving refugees. Tala approached the steps of my Gothic manor. She had spent years surviving the horrors of the ground, mutating just to keep those people alive. Now, seeing them fed and sheltered under an impenetrable dome, she dropped to one knee, crossing her shadow claws over her chest. I didn't want worship, I wanted management. I placed my hand on her shoulder and injected a sliver of the city's system authority directly into her grid signature. The neon green emblem of the steward burned onto her coat. "You're in charge of the population, Tala," I told her. "Keep them productive." From the sky, the 500 by 500 grid had completely transformed. It was a thriving, hovering metropolis. The Gothic manor stood at the center, surrounded by the glowing lights of thousands of new citizens. My territory was finally complete. The architect's empire was alive. I sat on my balcony with a glass of synthesized wine, listening to the hum of the city below. The dead silence of the obsidian was gone, replaced by the sound of humanity surviving on my terms. For the first time since the apocalypse started, I actually relaxed. But relaxing is a luxury that doesn't last long when you steal from the gods. As the city slept, the stars far above my atmospheric dome began to warp. They realigned, opening a colossal, golden, many-pupiled eye in the cosmos. The constellations had noticed their missing batteries. And they were furious. The gods didn't bother sending a warning. The colossal eye in the sky blinked, and the cosmos tore open. A pillar of pure, condensed divine judgment slammed into my atmospheric dome. It was enough energy to vaporize an entire terrestrial continent. The hex grid shield was strong, but taking a direct orbital strike from the constellations was pushing the mythic core to its limits. Red warning screens cluttered my vision. Shield integrity was dropping fast. If I let the dome shatter, my new workforce would suffocate in the vacuum of space. I didn't have time to manually manage the perimeter turrets while stabilizing the core. That's why I hired a steward. I routed localized administrative access directly into Tala's grid signature. I told her, "The airspace is yours. Do not let them touch my floor." Tala didn't flinch. Empowered by the city's grid, her abyssal shadow mutations flared. She stood on the edge of the towering obsidian perimeter wall and pointed her claws at the sky. Hundreds of automated turrets synced to her will, locking onto the epicenter of the divine beam. The golden pillar shattered, revealing the artillery. It wasn't a spell, it was a seraphim executioner. A six-winged, heavily armored angelic raid boss wielding a great sword the size of a skyscraper. The constellations sent their best exterminator to squash the bug. The seraphim's voice boomed through the dome, calling the humans parasites and demanding their immediate purge. The survivors cowered. But my scavenger golems didn't care about divine authority. The massive obsidian constructs marched out of the foundry, forming an impenetrable wall of dark stone over the citizens. I looked up at the terrifying, six-winged harbinger of divine wrath, clad in armor forged from the core of a dying star. I didn't see an executioner. I saw a massive, flying loot piñata filled with mythic tier crafting materials. The seraphim swung its greatsword, attempting to cleave my city in half. It didn't reach the floor. Tala leaped from the perimeter wall. Fueled by the city's endless mana grid, her abyssal shadow claws expanded to massive proportions, catching the holy blade in midair. The human parasite parried the god. Tala stalled the boss perfectly. I opened the city tier superweapons menu and spooled up the obsidian annihilator on the manor's roof. But I wasn't going to fire a destructive beam. If I vaporized the angel, I'd lose all the raw materials. I switched the cannon's payload from annihilate to a wide-cast, mega deconstruct field. The massive turret fired, casting a colossal, expanding neon green geometric net into the sky. It completely enveloped the seraphim in a cage of pure system code. The system doesn't care about holy authority. It only cares about base materials. The deconstruct net clamped down on the seraphim. The angel screamed in humiliation as its invincible, divine plate armor literally dissolved off its body, instantly breaking down into thousands of ingots of divine steel. Stripped of its armor, its sword, and its divine shielding, the terrifying raid boss was suddenly very fragile. The seraphim crashed heavily onto my polished obsidian floor, coughing up golden blood. The invincible executioner was reduced to a pathetic, shivering mess on my pavement. The human survivors slowly stepped out from behind the golems. They gathered around the crater, looking down at the broken angel. The absolute terror they had felt all their lives evaporated. I didn't just kill a boss, I shattered the illusion of divine invincibility for my entire population. I walked down from the manor and stood over the executioner. I didn't say a word. I reached down and ripped the solid golden halo right off its back. A high-tier, celestial drive core. The perfect component to upgrade the city's hyperpropulsion systems. I held the glowing halo high for the entire city to see. The cheers from the survivors shook the obsidian floorboards. I looked up at the massive, panicking golden eye in the cosmos above. Strap in, I broadcasted to my citizens. We aren't just defending our airspace anymore. We're going to ram the gates of heaven. A mythic core gave me altitude. A celestial drive core gave me escape velocity. I walked into the manor's central hall and slammed the angel's halo directly into the grid next to the Leviathan's heart. The system didn't just accept the upgrade, it screamed with absolute, unfettered power. I bypassed the atmospheric thrusters and engaged hyperpropulsion. The entire 500 by 500 city became an obsidian missile. Encased in a golden energy shield powered by their own angel, my empire shot straight up toward the massive, panicking eye of the gods at Mach 50. They thought the firmament was an impenetrable barrier. To the architect's system, it was just a destructible environmental mesh. We didn't knock. The sheer mass of the obsidian city slammed into the eye of the constellations, shattering the cosmic boundary like cheap glass. We breached the celestial realm. A dimension of endless golden clouds and floating marble temples. Against the pristine, holy aesthetic of heaven, my colossal 500 by 500 obsidian city looked like a brutal, jagged, pitch-black virus that had just infected the server. And I was the admin. The true masters of the system finally showed themselves. 5 constellations materialized from the golden clouds, completely surrounding my city. They were unimaginably colossal, humanoid figures forged from raw galaxies and starlight. They looked down at my fortress with absolute, cosmic fury. They didn't bother with spells or armies. They simply tried to crush us with the sheer gravitational weight of their divine presence. The constellations raised their hands, and a massive wave of solid divine pressure slammed down onto my dome, attempting to flatten the city into dust. The dome didn't even flicker. A mythic core mixed with a celestial core creates a localized physics engine that outright rejects external gravity. I casually leaned against my balcony railing, completely ignoring the giant gods trying to crush us. I had a massive pile of harvested divine steel in my inventory, and I needed to spend it. I opened the infrastructure tab and hit, upgrade all. The thousands of ingots of divine steel I stripped from their executioner were instantly routed into my perimeter defenses. Along the massive outer walls, hundreds of turrets reformatted, emerging plated in pure holy metal, their barrels humming with a lethal mix of system code and stolen divine fire. The constellations thought they were untouchable because mortal weapons couldn't pierce cosmic flesh. But I wasn't using mortal weapons, I was shooting their own holy steel right back at them. The upgraded turrets locked on and unleashed a devastating barrage of golden-green artillery that punched literal, gaping holes straight through the god's chest. The giant god reeled backward, roaring in unprecedented pain. The stray fire from my turrets didn't stop there, it swept across the celestial horizon, completely severing the foundation of a nearby floating marble temple. The pristine, holy structure collapsed into ruins, plunging into the clouds. Before the debris could even settle, Tala and her logistics squad were already on it. Under her command, dozens of scavenger golems marched to the edge of the city and threw out their tethers, aggressively dragging massive chunks of the shattered celestial temple right onto my obsidian floor. To us, heaven was just a very rich quarry. The inventory limits were flashing red again. I instantly deconstructed the holy temple rubble, routed it into the infrastructure tab, and laid down the blueprint for the obsidian vault, right next to the golem foundry. A colossal, windowless, impenetrable superbank materialized, vastly expanding my storage capacity. The gods realized very quickly that they couldn't win a war of attrition against an automated industrial complex. The wounded constellation actually dropped to its knees in the golden clouds, holding up a massive hand in surrender while my upgraded turrets maintained a firm lock on its face. They spoke through the system, begging for a ceasefire, offering me sovereignty over this sector of heaven. I told them sovereignty wasn't enough, I charge property tax. The colossal deity literally reached out and dropped a massive cluster of cosmic diamonds and divine artifacts onto my floor. My golem swept it up like common dirt. I forced the gods themselves to pay me rent just to exist outside my walls. I sat back on my gothic obsidian throne, tossing a cosmic diamond in my hand while my new, massive vault overflowed with celestial loot. The apocalypse was over. The architect's monopoly had just begun. My empire was finally self-sustaining. The turrets held the perimeter, the foundry churned out workers, and the vault was slowly filling with the gods' tribute money. For a few days, I actually thought I had run out of things to conquer. But the system is designed to escalate. A harsh red ping interrupted my morning coffee. I checked the territorial radar. It wasn't the constellations planning a counterattack. The threat was coming from straight down. The bottom of the abyss. When I deleted the terrestrial mountain, I assumed the fall killed Guildmaster Kong and his elites. I underestimated the Abyssal Flood. The mud didn't drown him, it infected him. Kong had mutated into a feral, a swang-like warlord, kept alive purely by his hatred for me. He was rallying the entire swarm. Using the sheer mass of millions of monsters, they were constructing a colossal, twisting pillar of hardened mud and flesh, building a literal bridge from hell to heaven just to reach my city. Tala looked over the perimeter wall, her shadow claws flexing with anxiety as the mud pillar pierced the lower clouds. She asked if we should mobilize the citizens to fight. I laughed. Tala, we don't fight ground wars anymore. We're an industrialized empire. We automate our problems. I routed 500,000 units of abyssal stone and celestial gold from the vault directly into the empty left wing of my city grid. The polished floor violently shifted and tore open as the system processed the most expensive blueprint I had unlocked yet. The green data cleared, revealing the obsidian shipyard. Colossal stone drydocks and heavy crane arms now dominated the left wing of the city. I didn't need to send troops to the edge of the wall to shoot down. I was going to send a fleet to carpet bomb them into oblivion. The shipyard's automated assembly lines roared to life. Within 60 seconds, the first obsidian dreadnought glided out of the drydock. No sails, no wings. Just a massive, geometric block of impenetrable black stone suspended by pure anti-gravity engines, bristling with heavy artillery. I synthesized 5 of them. I pulled up the command interface and generated a Fleet Admiral's badge, tossing it to Tala. "You wanted to fight, right?" I told her. "Take the fleet. Go show my old guildmaster what real vertical progression looks like." Tala didn't hesitate. She boarded the lead dreadnought, her terrifying shadow mutations flaring with system authority. Behind her, 4 more colossal obsidian battleships formed a perfect, silent V formation. The Architect's armada deployed. The dreadnoughts dropped out of the golden clouds, casting massive, geometric shadows over the corrupted world below. Kong and his millions of twisted mutants were halfway up their towering mud pillar when the sky above them simply turned black. Kong looked up. He thought he was climbing to fight me hand to hand. Instead, he saw 5 floating fortresses. He screamed in frenzied rage, launching torrents of abyssal magic at the hull. But the dreadnoughts were plated in celestial gold and shielded by mythic gravity. His attacks shattered like glass against a tank. From the bow, Tala didn't even draw a weapon. She just gave the system command. The underbelly bays of all 5 dreadnoughts opened simultaneously. Hundreds of automated heavy cannons unleashed a catastrophic, continuous waterfall of compressed green plasma directly onto the pillar. There was no epic final duel. There was no desperate struggle. The pillar of mud, the millions of monsters, and the mutated Guildmaster Kong were instantaneously vaporized in a blinding flash of structural erasure. The threat was mathematically deleted from the server. Miles above the carnage, the air in my city was perfectly still. I stood on my balcony, swirling a glass of wine, and watched the faint, silent green flashes illuminating the clouds far below. Guildmaster Kong spent his whole life trying to reach the top. But he forgot the golden rule: the architect always has the high ground. My city was running at peak efficiency. The dreadnoughts were docked in the shipyard, the vault was packed with celestial diamonds, and the golem foundry was fully automated. I had successfully turned the apocalypse into a passive income stream. But when you break the sky, you eventually have to deal with the leaks. The constellations had relied on the terrestrial mountains to plug the abyssal flood. By deleting the mountain and ramming my city into heaven, I had structurally compromised the dimensional barrier. The pristine golden sky shattered, and the true, unfiltered abyss began pouring directly into the celestial realm. This wasn't a mutated human or a corrupted beast. It was an abyssal calamity. A manifestation of the void itself. It poured through the rift, a formless tide of jagged purple eyes and gnashing maws, instantly corroding and devouring the pristine marble temples of the gods. The constellations tried to fight it, but you can't smite a black hole. Their golden magic was instantly consumed. Stripped of their arrogance, 3 of the galaxy-forged gods literally fled to the outer walls of my city, clinging to the obsidian bricks and screaming for asylum while my turrets painted their faces with lasers. They begged me to use the mythic core to save heaven. I told them I don't run a charity, I run a corporation. I generated a binding system contract and projected it in front of their massive, terrified faces. I'll provide pest control, I told them. In exchange, you sign over the territorial deeds to the entire celestial realm. With the abyss gnawing at their heels, they didn't have a choice. The gods pressed their massive fingers against the glowing green dotted line. In a flash of system code, their divine territorial authority was permanently transferred to my user ID. I didn't just invade heaven anymore. I legally owned it. I hit, claim territory. The system recognized my new borders. The original 500 by 500 city violently expanded. A massive shockwave of neon green grid lines swept across heaven, deconstructing the gods' remaining temples to fuel its own growth. In seconds, my platform expanded into a staggering 2,000 by 2,000 megacity. With the entire realm now classified as my build zone, I didn't need to mount a defense. I needed to build a processing plant. I spent 3 million units of stone and iron, laying down the blueprint for the Abyssal Harvester across my entire front wall. A planetary-scale industrial meat grinder powered by mythic gravity. I powered on the harvester. The mythic tier gravity vacuums engaged, creating an inescapable singularity at the front of my city. The apocalyptic swarm of millions of shadow monsters didn't charge my walls, they were violently sucked out of the sky, dragged uncontrollably straight into the massive spinning obsidian grinder teeth. The apocalypse hit the grinder and instantly pixelated. It was the most beautiful factory line I had ever built. The terrifying, world-ending monsters were instantly deconstructed, spitting out the back of the harvester as perfectly neat, infinitely stacking geometric cubes of high-density biomass and abyssal stone. Even the abyssal calamity itself realized it had made a mistake. The world boss tried to retreat into its rift, but the harvester's gravitational pull was absolute. The colossal, formless mass of void corruption was physically dragged into the spinning obsidian teeth, its giant purple eyes widening in sheer, inescapable horror. I didn't even watch it die. I just watched my inventory screen. As the calamity was shredded by the industrial gears, my counters for void cores and mythic biomass spun upward so fast they blurred. This was the ultimate dopamine hit. Total, unadulterated resource automation. The constellations sat slumped against my perimeter wall, watching the world-ending calamity get effortlessly processed into neat purple cubes of building supplies. The arrogance of the divine was completely shattered. They finally realized that the architect wasn't a hero defending them, I was just a much more efficient predator. The threat was neutralized in 5 minutes. The automated logistics network kicked in seamlessly. Hundreds of scavenger golems marched to the harvester's output bays, collecting the newly refined void materials and hauling them directly into the expanded obsidian vault. The factory must grow. I sat back on my Gothic throne, swirling a glass of synthesized wine. The abyss was securely capped by my harvester, and the gods were effectively my tenants. I held the glowing system deed to the celestial realm in my hand. I started the week falling into a puddle of mud. Today, I was the CEO of heaven. My 2000 by 2000 megacity was a flawlessly optimized machine. The harvester chewed the abyss in the front, the shipyard built dreadnoughts on the left, and the foundry processed infinite wealth into the vault on the right. I had achieved the ultimate idle game singularity. But when you monopolize an entire server's resources, the game developers eventually notice. The serene golden sky abruptly flashed a violently glitching crimson red. A sky-spanning system prompt announced a Sector 7 server wipe. The Universal Administrator had finally found the anomaly. The sky shattered like digital glass, and the server wipe arrived. It wasn't a spell, it was a cosmic firewall routine manifested as a physical entity. The Cosmic WIRM. An unfathomably large dragon made of pure dark matter and deletion code. Everywhere it moved, the celestial realm simply ceased to exist. The captive constellations lost their minds. They shrieked that the Universal Administrator was deleting our dimensional sector and that we had seconds before total erasure. Tala just rolled her glowing red eyes and continued filing her shadow claws. We were used to apocalyptic deadlines. The WIRM was coming to delete my hard drive. But I checked the reserves in my obsidian vault. Thanks to the harvester's infinite loop, my celestial and mythic resources were capped at 999 million. I didn't see an unstoppable cosmic eraser. I saw a free server upgrade, and I had the budget to catch it. I authorized a total reserve dump. The 2000 by 2000 megacity roared as a blinding wave of neon green gridlines shot into the void. In 3 seconds, billions of obsidian blocks materialized out of thin air. My city didn't just grow, it expanded into a staggering 10,000 x 10,000 continent-sized platform. The shockwave alone staggered the cosmic dragon. The new scale was breathtaking. The outer walls were now miles high. The foundry and the vault became industrial metropolises of their own. The central Gothic manor looked like a mountain of polished black stone. I finally had the floor space required for the biggest blueprint in the architect's tech tree. Directly behind my manor, I initiated the construction of the cosmic tether array. Massive, towering obsidian pillars lined with celestial gold runes pierced the sky. They weren't designed to destroy. They were designed to capture. The cosmic WYRM recognized the threat. It opened its starry jaws and unleashed its primary function, a catastrophic beam of absolute white deletion code aimed squarely at my manor's roof. It was designed to bypass all physical shields and simply rewrite our coordinates to 0. You can't block deletion code with a wall, but you can override it with higher administrative privileges. The tether array fired. Massive, thick chains of pure neon green system logic shot upward, piercing straight through the white erasure beam and violently coiling around the WYRM's colossal neck. The tethers locked on and violently retracted. The ultimate weapon of the Universal Administrator roared in digital agony as it was forcefully yanked out of the cosmic void. The WYRM crashed brutally onto my polished obsidian floor, its immense, starry mass pinned down by glowing green chains. I casually walked off my balcony, strolled up to the thrashing face of the World Eater, and pulled a system override collar from my inventory. Forged from celestial gold and powered by the mythic core. I didn't hesitate. I slapped the glowing green geometric ring directly onto the WYRM's snout. The override took effect instantly. The WYRM stopped struggling. Its volatile, destructive white energy shifted into a calm, subservient neon green glow. The server wipe had been successfully domesticated. It curled up around the tether array, functioning as an infinite, living server battery for my entire continent. With the WYRM leashed to my grid, the host connection reversed. The violent red error screens vanished from the sky. The system recognized that I didn't just defeat the wipe, I owned the hardware it ran on. A new, sky-spanning prompt appeared in bright neon green, New Universal Administrator, HAN. I sat on my balcony, watching the newly appointed Universal Server hum with absolute efficiency. I started on a 1x1 dirt block in a puddle of mud. Now, my empire was the physical capital of the universe. The constellations paid me rent, the apocalypse fueled my factories, and the cosmos itself was just another blueprint waiting to be optimized. Sector 7 was finally stable. With the cosmic WYRM leashed to my tether array, I had infinite server processing power. The foundry churned, the vault overflowed, and the shipyard was fully stocked. I was officially the supreme landlord of this universe. Naturally, that meant it was time to look at neighboring real estate. My architectural planning was interrupted by an unauthorized system ping. Not a monster wave. A direct server-to-server connection. An icy blue prompt flashed across my balcony, hostile raid detected, Sector 6. Apparently, the neighboring administrator noticed the change in management. A perfectly hexagonal dimensional rift tore open just beyond my perimeter walls. A massive fleet poured through. They weren't gods or shadow monsters. They were sleek, chrome-plated cybernetic warships running on hyper-advanced tech. Sector 6 had arrived to initiate a hostile takeover. A colossal hologram of the Sector 6 administrator projected over his fleet. He looked like a cybernetic tech lord, sneering at my obsidian architecture as if we were primitive cavemen. He broadcasted a demand for my total surrender, assuming I was just a rookie who got lucky with a server wipe. I completely ignored his speech. I was too busy staring at the hull of his flagship. The system identified it as refined cyberalloy. A material completely missing from my tech tree. I didn't see an invasion fleet. I saw a free delivery of premium, out-of-network building supplies. I pinged my steward. Down on the left wing, Tala was already standing on the shipyard runway, her shadow claws twitching with anticipation. Dozens of brutalist obsidian dreadnoughts hummed out of their dry docks. They were ready, but against hyper-advanced tech, standard obsidian wouldn't cut it. I needed to level the playing field. I accessed the tether array terminal and siphoned a direct feed from my new pet. The cosmic WIRM's absolute white deletion code surged through the city's grid, flashing straight into the shipyard. I patched the server eraser's code directly into my fleet's weapon systems. The Obsidian Armada launched. They looked like flying bricks compared to Sector SX's sleek, aerodynamic cyberships. Admin 6 laughed over the comms, mocking my archaic designs. But aesthetics don't win wars. Math does. The cyberships fired first, their advanced lasers completely failing to penetrate my mythic gravity shields. When Tala's dreadnoughts returned fire, they didn't shoot plasma. They fired compressed bursts of the WIRM's deletion code. The white beams didn't explode, they just silently deleted massive chunks of the enemy hulls from existence. Admin 6 panicked. Seeing his vanguard getting structurally erased, he initiated an emergency retreat, trying to close the dimensional portal. I wasn't going to let my premium supplier leave so soon. I fired the cosmic tether array. The massive green harpoon chain slammed into the edges of the closing rift, violently ripping the door to his universe wide open. I locked his server door open. Then, I overrode the city's hyperpropulsion engines. The 10,000x10,000 Obsidian continent shuddered. With the abyssal harvester grinding on the front wall, my entire empire began to slowly, menacingly accelerate directly toward his universe. Admin 6 screamed over the comms, demanding I respect dimensional treaties. I muted him. The jagged, pitch-black front wall of my continent, led by the spinning teeth of the abyssal harvester, violently rammed its way through the rift, physically forcing its way into the pristine, neon-lit skies of Sector 6. We breached. My massive, brutalist obsidian empire floated ominously over his sleek, fragile-looking chrome metropolis. The sheer size of my 10,000x10,000 grid completely eclipsed his artificial cybersun, casting his entire hyper-advanced civilization into pitch-black, gothic shadow. I didn't order the fleet to bomb his cities. I wasn't a warlord, I was an administrator. Because my city was now physically occupying his server space, the system recognized our grids as merged. I opened a brand new UI tab, Intersector Commerce, and confidently hit Force Asset Liquidation. I stood on the edge of my miles-high obsidian wall and looked down at his pristine, hyper-advanced metropolis. With a wave of my hand, a massive waterfall of green deconstruct energy rained down onto his skyscrapers. They tried to initiate a hostile takeover. Instead, they just became the newest supply node for the architect's infinite empire. Hostile takeovers are messy, but the logistics are beautiful. My continent blocked out their sun, and my system rained down a continuous deconstruct field. I was systematically melting Sector SX's pristine cybernetic skyscrapers into premium, cyber alloy, and funneling it straight into my vault. The ultimate forced asset liquidation. As the foreign alloys hit my inventory, my architect class absorbed their localized physics engine. A whole new tech tree unlocked. Cybernetics. Plasma routing. Neural grid networks. Sector 6 spent thousands of years developing this technology. I downloaded their entire civilization's progress in 10 minutes. Down in his crumbling command center, Admin 6 finally realized that sending fleets against an automated industrial complex was useless. In a fit of desperate, bruised ego, he authorized Sector SX's ultimate failsafe. The Omega Protocol. He decided if he couldn't beat my city, he was going to punch a hole through it. The remaining skyscrapers below detached from their foundations. Guided by glowing blue tethers, entire city blocks reassembled themselves mid-air into a colossal, city-sized mecha. A cyber titan. It ignited its main thrusters and rocketed straight upward, aiming a plasma-charged fist directly at the underbelly of my continent. My floorboards vibrated as the massive mecha approached. Admin 6 thought he was triggering an epic final boss fight. But I'm an architect. I don't do boss fights. I do manufacturing. Without looking over the balcony, I dragged the harvested cyber alloy over my golem blueprint and hit mass upgrade. The golem foundry on the right wing erupted with blinding blue and green light. The brutalist black stone fused with the hyper-advanced chrome. The heavy bay doors blasted open, and my new workforce marched out. The Cyber Obsidian Titans. A perfect, towering synthesis of abyssal magic and Sector 6 technology. The enemy titan slammed its plasma fist into my underbelly gravity shield and stalled out. Before it could swing again, my new Cyber Obsidian workers simply stepped off the edge of the perimeter wall. Dozens of them dropped directly onto the sleek enemy mecha, swarming it like a pack of metallic wolves. They weren't programmed for combat, they were programmed for salvage. The Cyber Obsidian workers used their reinforced, glowing hands to literally rip the pristine chrome thrusters and armor plates right off the enemy mecha mid-flight. Every time they tore a piece off, the hull pixelated into raw loot. They were stripping his ultimate weapon for parts while it was still running. With the Titan stripped and immobilized, its core was exposed. I pointed from my balcony, authorizing a direct line to the WIRM. The cosmic tether array fired. A massive harpoon chain, coursing with pure deletion code, shot over the walls and stabbed directly into the Titan's command center, initiating a brute force server hack. The chain pierced the console. The WIRM's code flooded Sector SX's mainframe, instantly overriding the rival administrator's permissions. Admin 6 screamed as his sleek, glowing cybernetic armor violently pixelated off his body. In a flash of green code, he was permanently demoted, reduced to wearing the ragged gray clothes of a level 1 user. With Admin 6 locked out, I absorbed the entire sector's source code into my grid. The 10,000x10,000 continent shuddered as the assimilation completed. Glowing neon blue cybernetic circuitry seamlessly wove itself into the brutalist black obsidian of my walls, my manor, and my factories. My empire had officially evolved into a cybergothic superpower. A corporation is nothing without its workers. I initiated a mass teleportation protocol, beaming the millions of panicked civilian users from the dying Chrome City below directly onto my vast, secure grid. Tala, flanked by the towering Cyber Obsidian Titans, greeted the new refugees. Our workforce just tripled. I walked back into my manor, the obsidian floors now pulsing with sleek blue circuitry. I opened the Universal Administrator terminal and pulled up the multiversal map. Hundreds of glowing orbs, representing different system sectors, floated in the air. I watched as Sector 6's icon shifted to my signature neon green. 2 sectors down. But the grid always demands expansion. I scrolled past my newly acquired territory and tapped the next glowing orb on the map. Sector 5. The Draconic Realm. I needed a new heat source for the foundry anyway. I fired up the WIRM's hyperpropulsion drive. The massive cybergothic continent slowly rotated, aligning the abyssal harvester with the fiery red dimensional rift of the next universe. The game was no longer about survival. It was about seeing how much of the multiverse I could fit into my inventory. My empire was a flawless, self-sustaining loop. The harvester turned the abyss into raw materials, the foundry processed them, the vault stored them, and Sector 6 provided the cyber infrastructure. I had effectively automated the apocalypse. It was time to expand my portfolio. I received a cross-server ping. It wasn't an invasion, it was an invitation. The Apex Exchange. A neutral dimension where the top 5 universal administrators traded world-altering artifacts. The invite told me to bring my wealth. They thought they were dealing with a lucky rookie. They expected me to physically travel to their server and bow before their economy. But a CEO doesn't commute. I used the cyber alloy from Sector 6 to construct a quantum boardroom, right next to my manor. I was going to attend this auction remotely. My hologram projected into the Apex Exchange. It was a gaudy, floating golden amphitheater designed to intimidate. Admin 1, the host, was wearing a suit made of literal starlight. He took one look at my muddy gray jacket and burst into condescending laughter, welcoming the peasant to the high table. I let him laugh. I was only there for the item on the podium, the Genesis seed. A core capable of rewriting the physical laws of a server. The starting bid was 100 million Apex credits. An amount that would bankrupt a normal dimension. Back in my physical body, I didn't reach for a wallet. I reached for a heavy-duty data cable. I hardwired the auction's payment gateway directly into the mainframe of my Obsidian vault. I wasn't going to bid with pocket change. I was bidding with the raw mass of an entire universe. The Apex exchange ran on a finite economy. But my city was an infinite loop. The Abyssal Harvester chewed the endless void, the foundry refined it, and the vault stored it. Every millisecond, my total net worth increased by thousands of units. I didn't have a budget, I had a money printer. I didn't even want to waste energy calling out numbers. I opened the auction terminal's command prompt and wrote a basic, 3-line autobid macro. While item is not owned, bid current highest plus 10,000. I hit execute with my pinky finger and took a sip of wine. In the amphitheater, absolute chaos erupted. Admin 1 tried to flex his wealth by bidding 500 million. My macro outbid him a millisecond later. He bid 1 billion in rage. The macro instantly raised it. The auction screen glitched into a blur of green numbers, draining my infinite vault in real time. I was mathematically suffocating the top 1% of the multiverse. The system couldn't handle the overflow. The auction gavel dropped automatically at 999 billion credits. Sold to Han. Admin 1 completely lost his mind. Humiliated in front of the elite, he summoned a sword of pure starlight and cleaved my hologram's head off. My projection just flickered. I wasn't even in the same dimension. The connection terminated. On my physical balcony, a system delivery portal pinged open. The Genesis seed dropped perfectly into my palm. They tried to mock the peasant, but the peasant just bought their most prized artifact from the comfort of his own home. I didn't put it in the vault. I walked straight into my central hall and slammed the Genesis seed directly into the power grid, fusing it with the mythic boss core and the celestial halo. The system screamed. I was injecting the physical rules of creation directly into my foundation blocks. The Genesis seed rewrote the physics of my territory. The 10,000x10,000 flat continent groaned, and then, the edges began to curve. The sheer black walls tilted upward. The shipyard and the foundry began to fold inward. I wasn't just expanding my platform anymore. I was wrapping it. The edges connected and sealed shut. The flat continent became a flawless, hollow obsidian planet. On the inside, my Gothic manor, the industrial zones, and the cities lined the inner crust, curving upward into an artificial golden sky. I had built my own Dyson sphere. An impenetrable, mobile, self-sustaining world. I stood on my balcony and looked up. Instead of stars, I saw the glowing lights of my own shipyards curving upside down across the sky. The air was perfectly synthesized. The automation was flawless. I started with a single block of dirt in the mud. Now, I lived inside my own masterpiece. The ultimate base was finally complete.